Well, thank you, Ahmed. That's a very nice introduction of myself. Um, Good evening, right? It's a good event. It's nice to see everyone. Some of you have your videos on, some not. But it's nice to hopefully everyone is staying healthy and well, which is kind of important at this moment of time. Okay. Um, it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here to share with you my perspective on research and what is a good paper, what's a bad paper. I'm glad Ahmed already gave some introduction about myself, so I don't have to say anything about myself, except I want to say very briefly about what I'm interested in. So I got my PhD in public administration and policy, and what I'm interested in primarily two areas: public organizations' adaptation to extreme events and technology used in government. When I say adaptation, I was referring to organizations' intentional adjustments to its operations, planning structure for future shocks, so they can be better prepared for the future shocks, whatever that's going to come. I'm saying this because I'm going to use some examples from my own research to illustrate some of the points I'm going to share with you. So maybe I should start this by sharing my screen. So I'm going to talk about what is a good paper, what's a bad paper, and most of the insights I'm going to share with you today is draws on my training as a PhD student at Arizona State University, as well as my experience as an author, writing a paper, receiving comments from reviewers, as well as my own experience as a reviewer for many journals across disciplines. Because my research agenda is interdisciplinary, I feel like I have been reviewed for journals outside in public administration, which is my main area, as well as in areas that are outside of public administration. So I think given the general audience, not all of you are from public administration, I think that would probably help me to speak more effectively to a broader audience from different disciplines. So when I look at the title, when I think about what is a good paper, what's a bad paper, the first thing that comes to my mind is really I cannot emphasize the importance of a good idea enough. So for me, I think a good research started with good ideas. So when I say a good idea, I think it's an idea that generates new theoretical insights, advances our understanding and knowledge about what is believed to be true. For example, I study adaptation to extreme events, right? And we are social scientists, and we study social phenomenon, and whatever social phenomenon we study, we know from the prior body of knowledge why something exists, why something happens or not. If I look at the organization's adaptation to extreme events, we know there's a common reason why organizations adapt themselves to future shocks. That is disasters, right? Most of them will say, okay, if the organization have experienced a disaster, they're more likely to build their capacity, prepare themselves for the next shock. And what we're going through right now, right? We are going through a global pandemic. We expect governments and organizations to better prepare themselves for the next shock, for the next pandemic, whenever that's going to come in. Okay, that is what I mean, what we believe to be true. The existing knowledge is we think disaster is going to drive organizations to adapt. But what if my research can tell you that disasters probably cannot drive organizations to adapt? And there needs to be some other conditions that also need to be met before disasters actually drive adaptation. So in that sense, my research is going to advance your understanding about what is believed to be true. What do you think disaster is enough to drive adaptation? I'm now telling you disaster needs to be accompanied with many other conditions for adaptation to happen. And I can tell you clearly why that is so with my research, with good data, with good analysis and good findings to convince you that is true. So in that sense, I'm contributing to this advancements of your knowledge and understanding. Therefore, I'm making a theoretical contribution. So that would be a good idea for papers. And of course, when we actually advance knowledge and understanding, we have incremental advancements. We also can make a significant advancements. To me, incremental advancements is you are reinforcing, your research reinforces what we believe to be true. Maybe from a different perspective. Maybe if you are studying, for example, what factors contributes to people's income, you might say what we believe to be true is a higher education would help people make more. But you might have a paper that you might have your research to say, well, maybe social network would also help people to make more money. And that you're trying to add to add different dimensions about what believed to be true about people's income level. But when I talk about significant advancements, it's not reinforcing what believed to be true. It's actually initialize some surprise. You know, upon the first sight, you think about this knowledge, and you find yourself surprised. Well, how could this be true? How could this runs counter to your common to your perception, to your prior perception, and it's not what you believe to be true. So, for example, if in my case, I tell you with my research that disasters do not only not motivate, they do not motivate organizations to adapt, but in contrast, they even undermine organizations' capacity to adapt. After disasters, organizations are even less likely to adapt. Then that's just some surprising finding, right? Surprising knowledge and understanding about what's believed to be true. And if I can also need to provide evidence why that is so with my research, with my investigation. And I can clearly explain cogently why disasters only can undermine organization's adaptation. Then I'm initializing some surprise, and I might change your perception about what is believed to be true. Then that is a theoretical contribution which might be significant for many people familiar with this set of literature. Then the next point about good research idea is, well, can I just say, well, we don't know anything about the social phenomenon. That's why our paper can make a contribution. Well, wrong, because for whatever social phenomenon out there in the world, there must be some knowledge and understanding about why certain social phenomena occurs or not. Maybe not in your discipline, maybe not in your field, but there must be something you can connect to the social phenomenon you try to investigate from other disciplines. So what you need to do is not to dismiss the current body of literature. Instead, what you need to do is really to go into the literature, go into the body of knowledge to tell the readers what do we already know, what do we already know about the social phenomenon, what do we still not know. For things that we do not know, can you pinpoint the whole? When I say pinpoint the whole, I mean you need to be really specific about where the whole is. For example, it's not enough to say we don't know why adaptation occurs. We don't know why people participate in government's decision making. Well, can you be a little bit more specific to say in what regard do we not know, right? Can you say, well, we don't know how institutions drive or hinder adaptation. We don't know how people's social economic conditions affected their participation in government's decision making. Or we don't know how people's network actually affects their decision making or participation in government decision making. In that way, you actually digging a narrow hole, which you can actually pave way for talking about how you're going to view it. If you say you want to study how people's network is going to affect their participation in government decision making, then you actually tell your readers how you're going to view it. You're going to conduct studies with interviews, your surveys with with individuals to find out how their network is connected to their participation in decision. So I think that is a second point is it needs to be grounded in literature and to the whole, whatever you decide you can contribute really needs to be drawn from the current literature, and you build on it and expand it. That's the way to do it. And also, I think the third point is your idea or your research you're thinking about should be practically useful. I think this is probably not as relevant in the past, but it's increasingly relevant today. Today, as a social scientist, we called upon to solve some social problems. And at the end of the day, after we do our research, ask ourselves one more question. If your readers read your research, however great it is, can they take away with themselves something useful to improve or inform their current practice? So I think it really gets into the key of, so what? Okay, your research is important, your topic is interesting, and we know how X influences Y, so what? Can you give us some kind of recommendations? Can you give us some advice to improve the current practice? Trust me, if you don't answer this question, you will be asked about this question by reviewers. You will be asked about this question by your audience if you make a presentation in a conference or to your colleagues. So I say this question, so what? I say this question so many times in my review, experience as well as in my attendance in people's other people's presentation. And then I think, well, those are what I believe are good ideas for research, but there are also bad ideas, right? The first thing, so we have some we stumble some pitfalls about coming up with a research. So the first one is your research is not really embedded in the current literature. It's detached from previous research. Well, let's be frank. Research ideas are hard, right? You know that, I know that. Sometimes it takes a long time to think about a research topic. And then, because it took us so long to think about a research idea, we get so excited, we want to just go ahead and do our research design, implement our research. But before you bury your head into doing this research, putting all the hard work, can you ask yourself one more question? What does my research contribute to the current literature? Can you articulate clearly which hole you're filling, how you're going to fill it? And if you don't do that, trust me, you're going to be asked this question, and your manuscripts might be just rejected out of hand because there's a lack of contribution in research. And sometimes reviewers, sometimes we see manuscripts claiming themselves to be to fill a hole which actually doesn't exist. Trust me, when you send your papers to a journal, the journal would have reviewers that are experts in your research area that they can easily say you are claiming to fill a hole that does not exist or that has already been filled by so many times. But you just either are not familiar with literature or you just fail to acknowledge the existing knowledge and the understanding and the existing literature. And sometimes reviewers will tell you, I don't believe this is a contribution, and they'll give you a list of studies that you have investigated exactly the same question as you do. Of course, if you think of what is going to happen to your paper, well, very likely a reject, right? So ask yourself, what's the contribution of your study before you actually put in all your hard work to do the research. So the next one is what I say probably very common among among the PhD students, junior scholars, as well as among scholars not in the Western countries, is that they replicate previous studies in a different context. That is, they're investigating the same research question same dependent variable, same independent variable, but the claims of self are making a contribution because they're examining the relationship in a different context. So many of the current studies are conducted by Western scholars in Western context, and so many of my colleagues in China think themselves will be making contribution by empirically test the relationship in Chinese context or in Asian context. But just because the same relationship, the relationship between X and Y has not been investigated in the Chinese context or the Asian context, doesn't automatically make it its contribution. Oftentimes, you find yourself coming up with the same results. Well, the same results as studies done in the Western context. Then what's new? Well, how does your research advance knowledge? No, we don't know. We don't learn anything from your knowledge, right? From your research. So I think it's often usually if the Asian context is the only thing that you can want to is the only thing you claim to be your contribution, and without further work to demonstrate where the contribution is, well, I would say your paper is very likely to be rejected. Instead, I'm not saying you should not focus on the Asian context, but I'm saying if you want to use your Asian context, whatever context you plan to use, if you want to use a context as a selling point, make sure you make it clear what are the social, economic, political, cultural, cognitive contexts that would possibly shape your relationship examined elsewhere. I'll give you an example. So right now we're undergoing a global pandemic, right? Many governments have enacted lockdown orders. And we have those lockdown orders aiming to change people's social distancing behavior. And if you want to do a study to investigate how effective those lockdown orders are in influencing citizens' social distancing behavior, and as we can see is, well, the policy, the lockdown orders are much more effective in the Asian context, in Asian countries than in Western countries. So here you have the same two variables you want to look at their relationship: lockdown orders and social distance of the citizens. So you're examining the same phenomenon, how effective those lockdown orders are. But you can find the relationship works differently because the effectiveness of lockdown orders in the Asian context is stronger than the orders in the Western context. And you can explain, and so here you find some difference in the relationship, and you also need to explain why that is so. Why are those lockdown orders more effective in the Asian context? You can relate to the social political structure of this Asian societies. You can relate to the social norms and values of the citizens in Asia that probably are more compliant with governments and more and prioritize their safety and health above their individual freedom. So those are the things if you can actually not just find the different relationship and also explain connect the differences to the uniqueness of your context, of the Asian context, then yes, you are making contribution. But remember, that's the actual work you need to do before you can make it a contribution. Just because you're simply applying the just because you're simply studying the same relationships in the Asian context, automatically does not make it a contribution. So I think this is something I see really common among my Chinese colleagues, and sometimes I feel they're missing an opportunity to actually make it a contribution. There were lots of times I find myself writing the review comments that says, well, yes, so there's one time I review a paper about citizen participation in Chinese context. Then I say, well, yes, you are examining the same relationship as being examined in Western countries, but you don't really articulate, you don't really connect your study to any of the uniqueness of a Chinese context that can possibly change the relationship. For example, in China, it's not a democracy. It's how does the citizen?
Excuse me, Dr.
I feel the authors missed a great opportunity to actually illustrate, show the advanced knowledge about how citizen participation work in an authoritarian region instead of in a democracy. So I think if they really want to advance that paper, those uniqueness of the Chinese context that can influence citizen participation needs to be incorporated. And finally, I think the larger people about our research idea is we just care so much about carrying our research, implementing our research, and writing our paper. And sometimes we don't care enough, or we don't use a lot of efforts to answer this so what question. Well, like I said, we are social scientists, and there's some expectation for us to inform practices. So it's really, if you say your research does not have any practical implementations, this makes your research look really bad. And nowadays, a lot more journals are increasingly asking authors to identify the highlight points of the research that practitioners can take away. So for example, in my field, in public administration review, they would even have you to identify the practitioner points. Just those points, don't talk about theoretically, don't talk about theory, just tell me what your research would recommend. After all the insights and findings you have for your research, what recommendations do you have for practitioners? So make sure yourself actually think about that question and put it in your paper before you submit to a journal. Is this better?
Yep.
Okay. Trying to slow down. Okay. So next one, we're moving to the key about a good paper. That is theory. We're all talking about aiming for good journals, right? Good journals really are journals where you don't have a theory, you probably don't get at the door. Very likely your paper will be rejected out of hand. So in top management journals, the editorial team even made a strong statement that is, if manuscripts contain no theory, their value is suspect. And then you might wonder, what is theory? This is something it took me a long time to figure out since I joined my PhD program. Since I think we spent a whole semester studying what is theory when I started my program. So theory focuses on the whys, not the what. So it focuses on explanations, not description. So for example, I'm going to talk again about my own research on adaptation. For example, in my study, I find many public organizations are not adapting proactively to future extreme events. Instead, they're relying on emergency or crisis management to respond to extreme events after they occur, instead of prepare themselves before the next shock occurs. What I told you is a description. What I told you is what is the phenomenon, right? The phenomenon is there's not enough adaptation. There's a limited level of adaptation. That is not theory, remember? And if I want to talk about the theory, I'll explain to you why is there a limited level of adaptation in public organizations. And to do that, that means I have to delve into the underlying processes and mechanisms to understand why the low level of adaptation occurs. Why is there not a higher level of adaptation? Why isn't everyone adapting? To actually really to find that out, I I need to go back to the literature to say what's the prior body of literature, but what's the prior body of knowledge says about adaptation. What are those mechanisms? So then I found, well, the literature says organizations need to experience extreme events before they can adapt. So, okay, experience. And also the literature says organizations also need to be aware of the risk before and become concerned about what's going to happen in the future and before they can adapt. So here, from the literature, I already identified two theoretical concepts that matters to the phenomenon I'm interested in. One is organizations' exposure and experience with extreme events. The other is their perception of the risk associated with extreme events. And the next, okay, I identify those two factors that could be really important about important to predict adaptation or the lack of thereof. And the next step I need to do is I put those two factors together and to get along with adaptation. So have experience with extreme events, risk perception, adaptation. Then I have to articulate how experience with extreme events and how risk perception can, or the interact, or those two factors, or the interaction of them can predict adaptation, can explain adaptation. And in order to explain the causal link, I have to use sentences and the paragraphs to describe the logical reasoning, right? You have, later on I'm going to talk about how sometimes we're using something else in lieu of sentences and paragraphs to describe theory. But you really using, in order to develop your theory, you need to have those, you need to write it down in plain language using sentences and paragraphs to explain the link. If you don't explain that theory, I would say this paper does not have theory. It's not enough to say X leads to Y. It's also important to say, why do you think X leads to Y? And finally, a good theory. A theory is abstract. Theory is abstract causal argument, which should have broader generalizability. So when you build your own theory, it's based on the literature, it's based on the central constructs and the relationship between those constructs. And they don't need to be hooked up with your empirical case, empirical setting. Of course, I know we all need to have to actually test our theory in an empirical case. But you don't really have to talk about your empirical case until you have come to the section about data and research design, right? When you talk about theory, theory should be abstracts that's not just applied to my own empirical case, should also apply to other empirical cases. For example, so I can say, well, I study how experience and how risk perception can affect organizations' adaptation. I examine this in the context of U.S. transit agencies. But do you think the relationship between risk perception and adaptation is only true with regard in the transit agencies? Or don't you think if the theory holds in transit agencies, it probably holds in many other agencies, many other contexts too, right? I can say this is the same relationship that holds in energy companies, in city governments, in Western countries, as well as in Asian countries. So I don't want to confine my theory only to the empirical, only to transit agencies in the United States. I want my theory to have a broader generalizability so everyone else reading it can have some takeaway from it. You don't want people to believe your theory is only applicable to your own context. Otherwise, if people, for example, if you think your theory is only, otherwise, why would the people want to read your paper? Because they're not going to have the data you have, right? They want to, if they want to have some takeaway from your paper, what would that be? It's not about your data. It's not about your analysis. It's about the insights, about the theory that's coming out, that comes out from your research, that comes out from your theory. Usually, paper with good theory, good theoretical components gets most citations, because everyone can benefit from reading your paper, not just the one that are using your data. We're not about the one that's using the same empirical case as you do. And then I think now we have to come to, hopefully this will give us some like a general understanding of what theory is. But to better understand what a theory is, we also need to say what theory is not, so that it can reinforce our understanding about what is a theory. So Sutton and Stroll had an excellent paper in their publication in 1995, and they identified 5 items people use in lieu of theory. In lieu of, because they think it is theory, but they are not. So the 5 items are references, data, variables, diagrams, and hypotheses. The first one, references. When I saw this, I found them. When I read the paper in my first year as a PhD student, I found myself laughing at myself a lot. I was laughing at myself, because this is what I used to do as a master's student. If I want to argue why X positively influences Y, I will write in my paper, literally, author A found X positively influences Y, and author B found this, author C and D also found this. Therefore, I think there's a positive relationship between X and Y. Okay, that is, and then in my first class, doing a literature review, I learned that it was wrong. It's not the way to do literature review. It's not a way to build your theory. And then the second one is, I'll come back to say why it is not. But I want to finish the list first. So the second one is data. Sometimes we think we have a theory because we see some factors, some items load on a factor. We have a descriptive stats of our paper. We have empirical observations. We even have quotes from interviews. Then we think, oh yes, because we say X leads to Y in her data, I expect to say the same in my data. That's another way people use. That's another item people use in place in lieu of theory. What they think is theory, which is not. And the third one, what we usually do is, what if you want to predict Y? What influences Y? I'll give you a list of variables. And sometimes I'll even organize the variables in multiple categories. Well, I will even organize those variables in different categories. Maybe I'm organized as social, economic, political, and cultural factors that can influence Y. And sometimes we'll go even a little bit further. Instead of giving a list of the variables, I give you a diagram. I put these variables into boxes and arrows as what you can see here. I tell you X1, X2, X3 both have an impact on Y. And I can go a little bit even further to come up with formal hypotheses to actually specify the relationship. I might say, well, X1 positively influences Y, and X2 negatively influences Y, and X3 has a nonlinear relationship with Y. So those are some of the mistakes we make when we think we are building a theory when we are not. So what is common? What is common across the 5 atoms? What is missing for making them? What is missing, and what is needed to make the 5 atoms actually develop them into a theory? What is missing is really this Y component, right? You want to talk about X influences Y positively? You really need to build in that Y component. Why would X positively influence Y? Be clear and really be specific, building, like I said, use sentences and paragraphs to write your theoretical reasoning about the logical connections among the variables. You have to logically explain with reason and evidence that X influences Y in a positive way. That is the way to build theory. So just by giving a list of reference, given the data, given the variables, diagrams, and hypotheses, do not build a theory. But they're not theory. But among the 5 atoms, so really you need this Y components, like I said. But among the 5 atoms, some of them are one step closer to building theories, to theories and others. Apparently, references and data are not theory. They're not even in the processes of theorizing. But variables, diagrams, and hypotheses are closer to theory than the other two. So because when you give a list of variables that can influence Y, you are already creating a boundary about the factors that matter to Y. And so that variables not included in your list are ruled out as not having a relationship, not having an impact on Y. And after you give that a list of variables, you build diagrams with arrows and figures, with arrows and boxes. Then you are specifying some of you're organizing some of the relationship among the list of variables you give. So you're a little bit one step further towards theory, but you're still in the process of theorizing, not theory. Like theorizing is a process for building a theory. And finally, you might even come up with some form of hypothesis to specify what those arrows mean in your diagram. And that brings you one step even closer to theory. And if you have variables, diagrams, or hypotheses in your paper, and if you're lucky, you might have reviewers that are generous and will give you opportunity to revise and resubmit your paper. But in the process, they will give you a lot of comments to revise your paper so that your theorizing process can be completed. So what you put, the variables, diagram, can turn into. Then we move to the next. And if you're not lucky, only having variables, diagrams, hypotheses, your paper will be rejected because you are not generating theory. You're just in the middle of generating theory. So it's based on your luck. So if you want to have a best chance, you better have a theory instead of having just this, instead of being in the process of theorizing. And I think there's some good practices for building a theory. First one is to focus on depth, not breadth. So instead of focus on the bucket factors, like over 10 or 20 factors, can you just narrow it down to just a couple of them or a few of them to do deep theorizing and make a novel contribution? trust me, when you have over 10 or 20 variables, not all the variables are that interesting. Many variables have been already investigated in prior literature. And why do you need to spend your time to build a series that's already been built, right? Instead of just focus on depth to do your theorizing on the few variables that really matters, that are interesting, that can possibly have some surprising findings. And the second one is you really need to clearly define the key concepts in your theory in a way grounded in the literature. So for example, I always have to explain to people what I mean by adaptation, because adaptation has been defined in so many different ways in the literature. I want to put my reviewers, my readers at the same page with me when I say what adaptation is. And then the next one is if you don't actually clarify, provide a good definition of your key concepts, particularly those that are not commonly used, your readers and the reviewers might diverge from your thinking, and you get a lot of questions because you just don't understand what you're talking about. And then the next one is what if you propose to use some theoretical framework or approach, for example, the lens of institutions, the lens of organization learning, the lens of administrative behavior, you have to justify your use of the theoretical approach. This is especially important when it is new, and you have to explain why existing approaches are not sufficient and how your research approach can add value to the existing body of literature. And next one is what I find really interesting, really useful, is when you have a complex theory with lots of variables, a lot of relationships, it's really helpful to provide a diagram with arrows and boxes to indicate the relationship. And sometimes I find myself only still confused about people's hypothesis, but when they build complex theory, but everything becomes clear when they read their diagram. But remember, diagrams themselves are not theory. You still need sentences, paragraphs to explain the logical reasoning behind those errors. And the next one is really relevant to my Asian colleagues, including yourself, is make your theory abstract and broadly applicable, not just to the Asian context, right? Like I said, theory is abstract. Theory should apply beyond your own context. So when you talk about theory, don't hook it up with the Asian context. You just talk about your theory in a way connected to the literature, and only talk about your Asian context when you come to the part about research design and data, so that you have your theory that's general and it's broadly applicable, but you are only using the Asian context, whatever it is, to test your theory. But after you're done with your testing, come back to talk about the theory in a broader and more broadly generalizable sense, not just confined to your Asian context. Otherwise, why would people outside of the Asian context read your paper? They're not going to conduct study in the Asian context. So what would they take away from them, right? And I think you need to be consistent with your unit of analysis. If you focus on individuals, make sure throughout your paper, you're focusing on individuals' decision-making, cognition, and behavior. If you're talking about organizations, do the same thing about organizations. Don't mix your discussion about persons and organization, and sometimes it gets confusing. What is your units of analysis? And of course, this will be a different story when you build a series or cross levels. But if you only focus on one level of analysis, make it clear and actually make your discussion throughout the paper, your writing throughout the paper, consistent about either individuals or organizations or communities or societies. And finally, you want to be explicit about your assumptions before people ask you. Oh, but when you talk about individual behavior, do you assume that individuals are rational, or do you assume they are boundedly irrational? When you talk about managers, do you assume managers are only like a common individuals who are responsible who only react, who only behaves like a common individual, or do you also expect what they do, what they think would have some causal linkage to how to their organization's performance and behavior? Make that clearly clear so your manuscript before you receive critique. And also I think there's some bad practice about building theory. Is first one is you throwing a lot of the variables, but none of the relationship is explored in depth. So if you have over 10 or 20 hypotheses, I can hardly say this is a good paper, because what's the real focus of your paper? How do we make sense of the finding when you have so many relationships? It's confusing and complex, and not necessarily built on our knowledge and understanding, because it just sometimes the relationships just becomes chaotic. And the second one is you don't want to come across to your reviewers as being cherry picking variables. So sometimes we include this or that variables because of having data, but really when you talk about why you choose and include those variables, you need to talk about it in a theoretical sense, not in the empirical sense. Of course, you don't want to tell your reviewers you include them because you have data on them. You want to tell your reviewers that you include them because current theories have identified those being really important. That's why I decided to include those variables. And currently, say some theoretical framework has included those those variables, so that's why I included them. And bad practices, another bad practice is you never clearly define your key concepts, which can be confusing to your reader. And the next one is sometimes the research only introduce a mediator or moderator for the sake of having them. Admittedly, your research can make a contribution when you introduce a mediator or moderator, because it advances our knowledge about what's beneath the picture. But when you're discussing your framing of your paper, don't talk about this in the empirical sense. Talk about this in a theoretical sense. So instead of saying we want to say how the relationship of X, Y is moderated by Z. That's very empirical. Instead of saying that, you can say, well, we noticed the relationship between X and Y varies across contexts, of which Z is the key variable. So once to explain how X, Y, the relationship can vary across different levels of Y. So that's how you introduce a moderator. And the next one is sometimes the papers have too many competing hypotheses. You don't really know where the authors stand. So it's fine to have one or two competing hypotheses, but when it comes to too many, you really need to put your foot down to take a standing. What side do you stand? If you think the relationship is more likely to be positive, put much of your efforts to discuss why the relationship is positive, and only briefly acknowledge it can also work in an opposite way, but we believe the positive relationship is more plausible. And finally, I want to say that scientific method algorithms to only replicate previous studies do not make a contribution, and they cannot compensate for the lack of originality in your paper. I want to say this even applies to technical journals. So recently I reviewed a paper in technical journal, Journal of Transportation Geography. The authors use also algorithm to investigate how weather influences ridership on public transit. And if you know anything about the area, you know the same question has been investigated so many times in so many contexts. And even though the author used a fancy algorithm, it was rejected out of hand. One reviewer wrote just one paragraph saying this paper does contribute nothing new in terms of study context, in terms of the results. So I recommend rejection. So just keep that in mind. Your paper needs to come. The originality of your paper comes from your ideas, not from your method. Especially not from your use of some algorithm. And finally, that's a lot about theory or building theories. And finally, I wanted to briefly walk you through some other parts of your papers that also need to be good for you to get it in the journal. So, of course, when you have research ideas, you want to have a good research design and implementation. So, but that's talking about research design is beyond the scope of the webinar. But I want to talk about some components in your paper that you want to be, you want those components there to have a smooth review. First of all, talking with regard whatever empirical case you want to use to test your theory. Explain to your readers why do you use the empirical case of your choice. Why do you focus your testing on transit agencies? Why do you focus your testing on the 500 cities in your country? Why do you focus this on Kurdistan? Why do you focus this on the I don't know, maybe some selected regions in Kurdistan? Make it clear. Why do you choose your sample that way? Why do you choose your empirical case that way? And you provide some background information on the empirical case related to your research. Like we might not know that much about Kurdistan, so that's where you can educate your readers and the reviewers about your locale, about your empirical case, so that you can help us interpret the results. And about data and measurements, this is something I see really problematic from my Chinese scholars. Maybe because training is different. So oftentimes there's not much detail in the data description part. They don't provide information how the sample is selected and what could be the bias in the sampling. And we don't know how the people are contacted. We don't know how people are surveyed. We don't know how the data was connected. And those are all the information you want to include in your paper to improve the transparency about your data collection. And when it comes to measurement, make sure your measurements needs to match your theory. You don't want your theory to say one thing and your measurements to say another. The mismatchment is going to kill your paper. And analysis, unless you're using something that's really commonly used, like OLS, you want to justify your use of your analysis method. Why are you using structural equation model? Why are you using grounded theory? Why are you using text analysis? What is the advantage of those? What is advantage of using this method to answer your research question? Be specific and be clear. And also, you need to be clear about your specification of your model and how you implement your analysis, whether it's a text analysis or interviews or survey data. Make it clear how you actually implement your analysis. And finally, results in the discussion. It's not enough, after we do it goes through all the efforts to have the findings. We present them in terms of numbers, tables, graphs. It's not enough to just have them. instead of you need to actually walk your readers through what do those results mean? What do the coefficients of X and Y mean in your study context? Especially if you find if the findings from your results contradicts with your theory, can you provide some possible explanations about why? If you expect the relationship to be positive, but you found it to be not positive or even to be non-significant, can you actually tell us why that is the case? If you don't ask, reviewers might ask you if you likely get R&R. So make sure yourself put yourself out there by providing some explanations. And finally, conclusion, always include discussion on limitations. There's no such thing called perfect research. So every research has limitations, and you want to put it in your discussion, so that, and which also helps you put on some defense against some critique. So you might anticipate some critique and you acknowledge your limitations, so that reviewers will not ask you again, or will not attack you again, because you already acknowledge those limitations. And you always want to discuss in your conclusion what's the contribution of your theory, what's the contribution of your research to theory and practice. This is something I see missing from many of the papers I review. Yes, the authors did really good work to collect the data, have designed the research and do the analysis, but their conclusion is really weak. Say from the conclusion, how does the paper make a contribution in whatever way? So you want to really make your contribution clear to your readers. If your contribution is not clear, you might even get desk reject. If it's not clear, you even if you luckily get a review, you still get a lot of questions from your reviewers, or for either your paper does not make a contribution or the contribution is not clear. So make sure you make the contribution both to theory and practice clear in your conclusion. I think that is one final thing I would like to say is good theory for high quality journals. Good theory gets your manuscript as a whole. You also need good design and good implementation to finally get it. I think that concludes my my talk today, and thank you all for listening. I hope this is useful to many of you, and I look forward to the discussion and your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fengxiu, for your very informative. But I think follow some of the tips and techniques you just discussed here. Probably we will decrease the probability of having our papers rejected. At least desk rejected. It helps a lot when you get desk rejections, because you don't get many comments from the editor, just one sentence or two sentences. But if you are lucky enough for your paper to pass the desk review, at least you will get some detailed comments where you can include the comments and revise your paper and finally submit it to elsewhere. I have got a couple of questions, but I'm not going to ask you the questions. Probably I'll ask you later, but let us give us the attendees an opportunity to ask their questions. Fengxiu, if you go to the chat group, you have got a couple of questions. Maybe you can quickly scan the questions, and if you can, answer all or at least some of them. Thank you.
Okay. You read up. I'm reading the paper. What do I mean by Asian context? Well, I would say Asian context included any study you conducted in the Asian country, right? That is what research is about. Asian country, not just sometimes people will go even specific about it's in the Kyrgyzstan context, it's in the Chinese context, in the context of South Korea, it's context of Vietnam. So that sometimes researchers think just because they're conducting that in the Asian country, it makes a contribution. But like I just said, it doesn't make a contribution just because of just because the study is you connect your data automatically make its contribution.
So Fengxiu, if you excuse me, I can also explain it a bit. A couple of days ago, I talked to a colleague who, this colleague is doing a PhD and working on a paper for submission to a journal. I asked them, what is the contribution of your paper? He said the contribution is my paper has not been done in the context of Kurdistan. And I told him, just because nobody has done this research in Kurdistan does not necessarily mean, your paper makes a contribution. You have to have some theoretical and practical contributions. Just because nobody has done in Kurdistan, maybe because it's not worth it. So as you said, we have to have a very convincing and compelling argument to sell our point.
Is really you want to have a deep theory, but you have a space limit in your paper. Trust me, I see the questions a lot. I have the same struggle. Sometimes I try to build really extensively on my theory. I'll need to find, well, I don't have much space for other sections. Then I have to really try to cut down any writing across the paper that's not absolutely necessary. So it's hard, it's always hard for me to cut text because it took me so much time and effort to put in the text. And now it hurts me have to take so much out to meet the word limit. But then I would say, you don't want to undermine your theory when you cut your text. You want to still make your theory, your discussion of your theory, that process and that writing clear to your readers. If you really sometimes need some extra space, takes too much, and I expect the range to save the balance. And if you really need, sometimes there's some like workaround to put some of your contents in screenshots of the page in tables, and you take screenshots of them. That can save you some words. And sometimes you can put some tables, some unnecessary, also or non-essential contents in your appendix to save some of the space. But I would say the last thing you want to cut is your theory. You can cut many other parts, or even move other parts to your appendix, but you don't want to do that to your theory. Not single components of your theory building should appear in your appendix, but your data description, your analysis, or your tables and the figures, some of them you can put them in your appendix, but not theory. Like I said, theory is the key components. Like I would say, theory is a selling point of your paper, and this is what high quality journals look at. You don't want to undermine that. So the next one, my question is we have to say about research contribution. I mean, at which part of paper we have to mention? Well, that's a good question. Well, I will say briefly talk about your contribution in your introduction, and extensively talk about this in your contribution section. I myself got reviews that says they give me an R, but they say, well, just by reading your introduction, we don't know where the contribution your paper makes. People always start reading your paper from beginning to end. So from the introduction, you want to let them know what contribution you are making. Otherwise, people will give up reading. They don't know if the contribution is not clear to them, and sometimes you don't have the hook for people to finish reading your paper. So briefly, I will say at probably the last 1 or 2 paragraphs, briefly talk about your contribution to theory and practice, and especially to theory. And then finally, in your conclusion section, have an expansive section or paragraphs, a few paragraphs to talk about your contribution to theory and to practice. And you can have multiple contributions to theory and multiple contributions to practice and make them expansive and detailed, articulated in your conclusion section. But you want to have some hook there in your introduction too. So your reader will be clear in the beginning about what they're reading, what they can expect to see, what they can expect to advance their own knowledge. What's the order of writing a paper? I mean, which part should come first and then which one should come second or extra? What I think, like for research papers, the outline is very standard, right? You have your introduction, you have your theory, then you come to talk about your data, your measurements, your analysis, results, discussion, and conclusion. So that's the typical order of writing, outline of writing a paper. Usually you don't want to be innovative about this. You know, oftentimes we want to be innovative about doing our research. By writing a research paper in those orders, you don't want to be innovative. You want to conform to the standard. So sometimes you deviate too much from the standard, you cause confusion. If you read any research paper, chances are they have almost the same order. So that's what in writing a paper. Well, I think that's what the order you put your research on the paper. But in the process, how you do that, it really varies across person to person. For example, if I collaborate with my co-author would be responsible for writing the introduction to theory. I'll be responsible for writing the data, measurements, analysis, results. And then we will put the two parts together to make it a paper. Or sometimes I'll wait for my co-author to write one component before I start the next one. So I don't think there's really a standard, like a definite answer to that. It depends on you. But what I would like to say is your abstracts probably comes at the end of your paper. You usually don't write your abstracts until you have finished writing the entire paper. Well, usage of advanced fancy algorithm, and we see explosion of metal and base analysis. Can you comment? Well, you're talking about economics. I don't really, I'm not an economist, but I do say the meta and the base analysis. Let me put it. Base analysis is just a different way of viewing, a different way of revealing relationship. It's instead of it's just a view of relationship in terms of what's your new information, how's your prior is altered by new information you receive. I see this being conducted in many. Yes, it's being conducted in many economics journals, and also, but it might. I don't know what you want me to comment on the explosion of it. I would say based on the base method are gaining popularity nowadays in social sciences, although it has been, although in the past couple of decades, probably there's not much usage of a base. And I do believe in the value of meta-analysis. It's really give you a quick overview about what is being done, and also give you a quick overview of the relationship between X and Y that you're interested in. And that I think that like meta-analysis, and sometimes those papers they contribute. They also make a contribution, advance our knowledge about our knowledge and understanding about what is believed to be true by pulling together all the current literature to extract the key insights from them. So the next one is can you do when you got bias sampling? What do you mean by answering so what question? I mean, answering so what? How can you design a good outline for a research paper? When I go bias and sampling, right? I think this has to do with this is a lot to have to do with our research design course, right? You choose your sample. For example, I review a paper that studies citizen participation in China. They choose 2 cities. Oh, they choose 4 cities. But they never explain why they choose the 4 cities. And apparently, to me, those 4 cities are the top tier cities in China. Then I asked the authors, do you expect what you say in the 4 cities are going to be different than cities elsewhere in China? Because the first tier cities, there are only less than 10 first tier cities. And if you don't have other tiers of the cities from other tiers in your sample might be biased in terms of talking about the citizen participation in China as a whole, because what you study might only be applicable to what you observe is only probably applicable to those first tier cities. That is what I mean by bias sampling. You are not drawing a representative sample of the entire population you want to represent. If you want to study college students, you cannot just sample undergrads, right? You need to have a different. You need to have a mixture of college students, master's students, and PhD students to study college population. If you study the population in Kurdistan, you cannot just study women, right? You also need to study men. You cannot study people only at our age. You also need to study people that are children or people that are seniors. So if you want to generalize your research to the population, you want to make sure your sample actually has some representation from different segments of your population. What do I mean by so what question? So what question is really, okay, you have your research, you have really good insights from your research. You say you find X positively influences Y, X2 negatively influences Y, and there is nonlinear relationship between X3 and Y. Okay, so what? So based on what you find, what are your recommendations, advice for practitioners in this area? If your dependent variable is citizen participation, if dependent variable is adaptation, what do you suggest what managers or organizations can do with your findings on adaptation? What would you suggest individuals to do or governments to do to attract people to government decision making based on your finding? That's what I mean by so what. What can people do with the findings from your research? Practically, not just theoretically, right? A good design, a good outline for a research paper, like I said before, it's really standard. An outline is, you don't want to be innovative. An outline should just start with introduction, theory, empirical setting, data measurements, analysis, results, discussion, conclusion, and then finally you come back to add an abstract to your paper. I think this is another one. How to find a theory related to your paper and why having theory is important. I think this is a good question. Why having theory is important? Because you want people who don't, you want everyone reading your paper to take away with themselves something that's useful, something that's well, that's helpful to them. Say if you don't have a theory and you're doing study on Kurdistan, and what you're going to find is probably only reflects what's happening in Kurdistan. And if you have a theory, you explain to people why does a social phenomenon occurs? Which if you have a theory, then that means what occurs in Kurdistan might also be expected in other contexts. So, like I said, theory is generalizable. So people outside Kurdistan read your paper, can take away with themselves something useful they can apply to their own research to understanding phenomena in their own context. Otherwise, if you don't have a theory, your paper is purely empirical about what's happening in Kurdistan. People who don't ever need to conduct studies in Kurdistan, why do they need to read your paper? Why do they, what's anything useful from your paper for them? Because your paper only is applicable, what you say is only true in Kurdistan. It has nothing to do for myself. It tells me nothing about what I need to do about my own research. Because it's not conducted in Kurdistan, it's conducted in the United States or China. So I think the theory is important because it explains how things work, not just in your context, but in many other contexts, so everyone can benefit from it. Everyone can find some value with it. How do I find a theory related to a paper? Well, that involves really hard work in your literature review, where you have to sometimes, in order to come up with a theory, you have to go through lots of those current studies about the same topic, and to explain why the social phenomenon occurs or not occur. I would say start. I don't know how you guys do. Do you have Google Scholar there? Usually, if I want to study a social phenomenon, I will put in the keywords in database. With whatever database you use. Usually, I use Google Scholar. I just put in the keywords, sometimes a different combination of the keywords in the search box, and I will say what pops up. Usually the papers that pop up are organized by the citations. So I will start with some high citation papers. That's usually papers getting high citations usually probably have something useful there for you to think about your own research. So I will go through the first few pages to find research that's really relevant to the phenomenon I want to study, and go and actually, and for the papers I will scan their abstracts to say if there's any interest, if any of the paper advance what I believe to be true, because I already have getting into this literature review with some prior knowledge and understanding. And after my search, if I find some of the papers can advance my knowledge and understanding about what I believe to be true, I'll give them a careful reading. And then sometimes after I read this paper, maybe I read a high citation paper, maybe in the middle of reading, I find many other citations in the paper. The paper has cited many other studies that are highly relevant to my study, to my research. I'll go to their reference list to find the papers that I was not able to find through my Google Scholar search, but I found it by reading the papers and by reading the references in the papers. Then it's just a snowball process. I just keep building my database and progressively identify papers that's relevant and that's useful, and papers I would like to give a careful look in order to build my own theory. What's the difference between theoretical and conceptual analysis? I'm not really sure what is what is a conceptual analysis? Carbon? And a theoretical analysis? I would say analysis is empirical. I have not heard about this thing about theoretical analysis. If they want carbon, if you want to explain if you want to clarify what you're asking, I can answer the question. But so far, I don't have a good idea what is a theoretical or conceptual analysis.
I actually don't think Karwan is still here. Probably you should go to the last question asked by Shewaz Mustafa, and then we will end our webinar.
Okay, another question when we reach conclusion, how to refer to this theory or how to connect the ideas. If you provide your answers with an example. When we reach conclusion, how to refer to this theory. Include conclusion. In your conclusion, if you want to relate back to theory, you frame it as your theoretical contribution. What you found in your study. How do your findings advance understanding and knowledge about what we believe to be true? That's your theoretical contribution. Make it clearly so. So that becomes your theoretical contribution. For example, and I go back to my example. So the common wisdom is disasters can drive public organizations to adapt. But your theory after being tested with your empirical case, your data analysis, you find, well, disasters are not enough because there are other conditions that also need to be present for adaptation to occur. Then you discuss what are the other conditions that need to be there for adaptation to occur, and so that you advance what we believe are the other conditions that drive adaptation. You discuss that as your theoretical contribution, and then when you talk about your contribution to practice is, well, yes, your theory says condition A, B, C, D are also important, need to be simultaneously present with disasters for adaptation to occur, and then so what? So what are the recommendations or advice you have for current managers, governments to improve their practice, to increase the level of adaptation? That's your contribution to practice. So your theory, when you talk about theoretical contribution, you really connect to the prior theory, prior literature. But when you talk about your contribution to practice, you talk to practitioners. Just think about it, you're talking about two different audiences when you talk about contribution and contribution to theory and practice.